Well, folks, it's been quite a stretch of warm, beautiful weather here in Nova Scotia. It's just unbelievable. The July has been, if you love warm, blue skies, lots of sunshine, heat, this has been a great month so far, and it continues today. Just a benign day out there. Yesterday was just absolutely beautiful as well. And we live in a great part of the world for sure, and it's summer in Nova Scotia is a great thing. We could use some rain, though. Dry conditions. If you've been around any lakes or rivers or streams, or you'll know that the water levels are quite low, and we could use some rain. But anyway, we'll talk to Alistair Alders tomorrow on the Friday edition of the show, as we do each and every Friday at 12 after the 12:30 news, and we'll discuss some of these weather related things with Alistair. Always a good chat. I'd like to thank Vanessa Vandeness on the other side of the glass. The control board's doing a fine job. As always, not doing a fine job, the New York Yankees, 4 throwing errors last night. And the Blue Jays, 8-4 victors over my New York Yankees. Bo Bichette's 2-run homer capped off a wild victory as the Jays held off the Yankees, as mentioned, 8-4. The victory tied the Blue Jays with the Houston Astros for the best record in the American League. The Jays are on the road tonight for their opener, a 4-game series against the Detroit Tigers, who have been struggling as of late after the All-Star break. But the Tigers are a pretty good team. Should be a good test in Detroit for the Blue Jays, who have a 4-game lead over the Yankees. So it's early yet, only July 24th, but right now things looking good for Toronto. But again, it's only early. Anyway, my Yankees just not getting it done as of late, that's for sure. Lots to get to today when we open the phone lines, as we do each and every day, today from 11 until 12. I'm sure that some of you will want to carry on the conversation that we were discussing yesterday around this planned concert by a controversial American singer who was scheduled to play at the National Historic Site in Halifax. Last night, it was canceled at the last minute. Parks Canada revoked the permit, which was required to play at the York Redoubt. It was revoked. The release said that Parks Canada was not putting on the show. It was being planned through a vendor, and that the decision was made to revoke the permit was made due to evolving safety and security considerations based on confirmation of planned protests and input from law enforcement. The concert was moved to another location outside of Halifax. Earlier in the week, people living near the site began to raise the alarm over Christian singer and strong MAGA supporters' show at the historic site. In the past, he has spoken out against the LGBTQ rights, along with abortion rights, ran unsuccessfully for Congress as a Republican in California. And the show was to begin a tour of Canada that was scheduled stops in Charlottetown, Moncton, and Quebec City, which I think have been all canceled as well as a result of this fallout. So it raises some bigger issues, folks, and some large issues, and we talked a lot about freedom of speech and freedom of expression yesterday. But I think that because this was a national park and the federal government was involved because of that, does the federal government have a responsibility to safeguard values, which would include inclusion, acceptance of all, regardless of sexual orientation, race, skin, color, etc.? Does the federal government have that responsibility on our behalf to safeguard those values? And was this an example of the federal government doing just that? And if so, is there room for expression for those who don't necessarily agree with all of those values, and in particular same-sex marriage and abortion? Because linked to all of this, of course, is religion. And many people, many fundamental groups, religious groups, feel as though same-sex marriage is wrong. They believe that it's inherently wrong. And they believe that abortion is inherently wrong. I don't agree with either of those two statements. I'm pro-choice, and I believe definitely that same-sex marriage should be allowed and is allowed and should continue to be allowed. But not everybody agrees with me, and some people feel entrenched that they should not be in our society based on religious tenets and religious beliefs. So is there room for those people as well? And if so, does the federal government represent them? And look, again, the federal government, does it have a responsibility to speak on our behalf or act on our behalf and upholding certain values and safeguard those values, like inclusion, like acceptance for all, regardless of sexual orientation. And I'm not sure. Some people say that people's personal choices should be that you should be safe to make your personal choice and free to make your personal choice. Again, how much oversight should the government play when it comes to these things? Of course, when it comes to the law of the land, they certainly have a say, because the government has say over who gets married and what dynamic can be allowed to be married, of course, and abortion is certainly regulated. And so the government does have an inherent responsibility. So these are some big questions, folks. And again, fundamentally, was this an example of cancel culture, I suppose? Even though, look, I don't agree with anything this guy stands for. I don't agree with anything that he espouses. I don't like him. I'm not a fan of the MAGA movement at all. And I think that it's great that we live in a country that is accepting and is progressive in many ways. That all said, again, there's many people living in this country who are grown up in this country who don't believe in the same things that I do and that the federal government espouses. So how do we coexist, I guess, as a society under those circumstances? And did this cancellation of this show violate in some way freedom of expression? And is the government responsible to be society's moral compass? That is something that I would like you to weigh in on. Also, a couple other things that caught my eye. This story, EVs is always something that is inherently controversial, and I think inherently so. Automakers calling on Ottawa. I saw this story in the Chronicle Herald this morning. Automakers calling on Ottawa to roll back its electric vehicle mandate said their case has so far failed to sway federal environment minister, who appears committed to keeping it in place. Rising pressure over the EV issue is part of the central tension facing Prime Minister Mark Carney, which is how much to adjust the Liberals' climate policies to address concerns coming from industry and premiers amid a time of economic uncertainty. Long-standing demands from the auto industry and its associations to scrap the electric vehicle mandate have grown louder in recent weeks as they point to falling EV sales and struggles in the trade war with U.S. President Donald Trump, who has taken direct aim at Canada's auto sector. Several provincial leaders at the meeting of premiers in Huntsville, Ontario, called on the Prime Minister's government to back off the mandate, including Doug Ford, who said it should be scrapped because companies will not be able to meet the targets. So, again, what are your thoughts on this, folks? Is this a clear example of a government minister out of touch with reality and driven by ideology, full stop? Because I would suggest that is the case. That the environment minister needs to wake up and realize that this EV mandate by 2035 to have 100% of vehicles manufactured in Canada be EVs is ridiculous at this point. It's foolish, and it will completely decimate the auto industry, which is already on the ropes big time. It's just not realistic. And it's all probably tied in based on what's happening in the United States, of course, which is with Donald Trump, and it has thrown the entire EV movement and the EV industry against the ropes. We know with Joe Biden, he was moving in this direction, and the Democrats were moving in that direction, but that is done in the U.S. The Republicans and Donald Trump have no interest in this, and the American consumers don't have a large-scale interest in this. EV sales are down, and that trend will likely continue for a variety of reasons. So is it realistic to think that all EVs manufactured in Canada in 10 years would be all required to be EVs? That's just a decade away. And what might that business model look like, and would Canadian consumers buy into it? And I would suggest that no. Price point is a big problem, but some people aren't comfortable with EVs for range anxiety and other issues. People have concerns about the batteries, the warranties, So it's something that you can, of course, weigh in on. What is your stance on EVs in this country, and should we indeed have an EV mandate by 2035 to have all manufacturers be required to produce EVs? And how about opening the market up to China, to Chinese EVs, which now have a 100% tariff on them, which has basically made them unsellable in Canada? Should we, if the government wants us in EVs, then perhaps open up the market and reduce that tariff or eliminate it so that we can buy affordable Chinese-made EVs? And what price point would entice you to buy an EV? That is something else that you can get into. As mentioned when we open the phone lines, between 11 and 12. Strongmare Powers. This is something else that I'll be chatting in a little bit with Patrick Sullivan, President and CEO of the Halifax Chamber of Commerce. They released the results of a recent survey on the potential introduction of Strongmare Powers in HRM, which was conducted last week, and they asked their members about Strongmare Powers and what their thoughts are on this. And Patrick Sullivan will share his views on this. And again, this is something that you can get into when we open the phone lines. Do you support the idea of Strongmare Powers in HRM? Because for some people, they feel as though that is needed, that this council needs some leadership, that the province should continue to have say over what happens in the municipality, because some people feel that this council is not doing its job and is not competent, for lack of a better expression. However, others feel as though that the mayor should not have Strongmare Powers, that it would erode democracy and undermine council at large. And look, there's some value, there's some validity to those concerns as well. Like everything, there are always nuances in all these discussions, right? So that is something else that you can get into when we open the phone lines in about an hour's time. And of course, the sentencing of the organizers of the convoy in Ottawa. I received some emails on this as well. This email from Phil says the convoy had an honorable beginning, but as it was hijacked by people who were not in it for the right reasons, 40% or maybe more of donations came from the U.S. What started as a protest turned into an occupation. We all know this. 7 years is a bit much. I would give them 2 years, less time served. An example has to be made. That comes from Phil. So, yeah, 7 years is something that some people feel for mischief is definitely out of line. Others feel as though it's appropriate. Of course, I'm talking about the sentencing hearing of the two Freedom Convoy leaders, which continues in an Ottawa courtroom today. Tamara Leach and Chris Barber were found guilty of mischief for their roles in the 2022 protest against COVID health measures that paralyzed downtown Ottawa for weeks. The Crown is seeking a prison sentence for 7 years for Leach and 8 years for Barber, who was also found guilty of counseling others to disobey a court order. So what are your thoughts on that? Of course, interesting conversation as well, and hope to hear from many of you with that. On the issue of freedom of speech, Don says this is not freedom of speech issue, talking about the canceled concert. Says this character could have held his concert at a private venue, which he ended up doing, by the way. Says it is more a question of whether our government should exercise its right to allow certain activities from taking place on government property. They have every right. This character espouses hate, not tolerance. And as an aside, isn't he up on charges of fraud? Should he even be allowed in Canada? If he were Canadian, would Trump let him into the United States? That comes from Don. And then, of course, that dovetails into the comments that I was making earlier about the federal government and its role over these issues. So again, lots of time to take your calls between 11 and 12, and I received a number of emails as well on other issues, which I will hopefully get the time to read some of them. And thanks so much for tuning in and listening, folks. We very much appreciate it. Coming up after the break, as mentioned, Patrick Sullivan, President and CEO of the Halifax Chamber of Commerce, will be my guest. We'll be back. The Halifax Chamber of Commerce released results of its recent survey on the potential introduction of strong mayor powers in HRM conducted last week. Joining us to discuss all this is Patrick Sullivan, President and CEO of the Halifax Chamber of Commerce. Patrick, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having me, Todd.
All right, so why was this something that you felt you wanted to get some input from your members?
Well, I think this has certainly been a topic of conversation over the last number of weeks, perhaps months, and sort of came to a head a little bit over the last little while with this whole discussion of Morris Street and one-ways and all those sorts of things. And it's an increasing topic of conversation and has been implemented in other provinces as well. So we wanted to check in with our members to see what they thought of the idea of strong mayor powers.
All right, and what are some of the findings?
Well, it's actually pretty evenly split. So we did find that our members are fairly slightly supportive, if I could put it that way. So if we look at strongly support, 41% strongly support strong mayor powers, 34% strongly oppose, and then we have slightly more interest on the somewhat support. So when you include the strongly support and somewhat support, you're at about 56%. And when you do the somewhat oppose and strongly oppose, you're at about 42%. So there's a slightly greater number of people who support the idea of the strong mayor powers. Although when you look at we ask particularly whether it will have a positive or negative impact on the business environment in Halifax, we've got a greater number who believe that it'll have a positive impact.
Okay. Any surprises here on your behalf, or?
I think I was a little surprised that it was sort of a greater number of people thought that it would have a stronger impact, a positive impact on the business environment in Halifax. And we saw people saying that the ability to have faster decision-making, clearer accountability, and more focused leadership all would contribute to that better business environment in the city.
Okay, what's your take on it?
I think, excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm getting over pneumonia, Todd, so I'm sort of clearing my throat occasionally.
Sure,
I apologize.
No problem.
But I think my feeling is that a larger number of people who are interested in this, they do see the faster decision making. I think we would just like to see that these are implemented if that's what various people decide to do. They're implemented in a cautious way to ensure that it's not kind of over the top. We saw when it was implemented in Ontario, there's actually a large number of municipalities who turned them down, who said they don't want them. So I think it's important to have sort of some checks and balances and to kind of make sure that the pros outweigh the cons on the strong mayor powers.
Okay, how about the fact that this was not a peep when campaigning either by Andy Fillmore or the premier of the Tim Houston? What about that? The fact that the electorate didn't have any say over any of this.
Well, the electorate. And I'm thinking more provincially, because it would be the provincial government that would implement this on the municipal government. So, it's really more a conversation about the provincial government, and provincial governments are elected to make decisions on behalf of the voters. Obviously, you can't have a discussion of everything during a political campaign. So, we're not really too perturbed when we see that conversations come up during a 4-year term and that they weren't discussed during an election campaign. It frankly happens all the time. But I think it's important that, it is the province that would make this decision. The term is that municipalities are creatures of the province. And we're certainly seeing that now with the provincial government having a greater impact and making a few more decisions than they used to on our municipality.
Well, I get that, but if Andy Fillmore had no appetite for this, then would it be happening? I would think that he has to have a role in it, does he not?
Well, yes, I expect he does, and I don't hear too much from the mayor, saying that he wouldn't be interested in this. I think the mayor would like to have an efficient, effective council. Not to say they aren't now, but he has an agenda, and he was elected with an agenda by the entire population. Not that everyone voted, but he certainly was on the ballot for everyone in Halifax, versus councillors who are on the ballot for a smaller area of the municipality.
How about a potential trial period for this instead of just simply implement it with a trial period? What are your thoughts?
I think that's a reasonable comment, and that was one of our suggestions. So whether it's a trial period or whether we kind of take a look at some of these things, run them in parallel for a little while, have an outside group that could evaluate some of these things. We want to make sure that we do this correctly. And I won't comment on the current mayor or the current council, I guess, when I use this example. But, if we have a great mayor and a great council today, that's not to say that we won't have a great mayor, that we may not have a great mayor or a great council in the future. So you want to make sure that when you're passing legislation and you're implementing something, that you feel good about the possibilities of it lasting well past the current group of folks who are in council and in the mayor's chair.
All right, another suggestion based on member feedback, reading your releases, checks and balances is something that could be at play here. Get into that if you will.
Yeah, and I think that's probably true. So, whether that's the mayor having the opportunity to perhaps override council at times. In Ontario, it's 1/3 of council support. If there's 1/3 of council support, the mayor can agree with that 1/3 and something passes. We could make it something closer to 50% in Halifax to give a better than the 1/3 size, if you will. So that would be one check. Again, having an outside group who could look at some of this in a few months. We wouldn't want them to police every decision because that would be too much. You're, again, introducing an additional level of bureaucracy then. But, if there was a group that could kind of go back and look at some of these, or, if there's a group that looks at how this has been implemented in other areas. There are other ways to do this in U.S. cities, not that they're the best example for everything, but in U.S. cities, we actually see more political parties in municipal government, which would allow for, much like the provincial or federal government, you would have folks who may vote along a party line, which would allow sort of the municipal government to kind of move along, rather than it is one person, one vote, which is fine, and that's the way it's worked for a long time in Halifax. But we are at a point where it seems like things are changing much more quickly, and we need to make decisions sort of more quickly and more cost effectively, rather than waiting a long time to make some decisions.
All right, and enhanced ethics and oversight. This is another recommendation or suggestion, I should say.
Yeah, so I think that gets back to, is there an independent body that can look at this? It's likely. When it was rolled out in Ontario, I think it started with Toronto, but then it rolled out to other municipalities. We don't know how other municipalities feel about this across Nova Scotia. I think it's only being discussed for Halifax at this point, the largest municipality across the province. But if there is a need for something like this, then maybe there should be some oversight, not only in Halifax, but across all the municipalities that may implement this across the province.
Patrick, always appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Todd. Have a great day.
All right, take care. Patrick Sullivan, President and CEO of the Halifax Chamber of Commerce. Nova Scotia gardeners and homeowners endure a Japanese beetle infestation. We'll discuss this with Niki Jabbour when we come back. All right, joining us is Niki Jabbour, award-winning author of 4 gardening books, gardening expert, and former host here at our radio station. Niki, welcome. It's been a while.
Hey, Todd. Great to talk to you. Thank you so much for having me. I miss you guys.
Indeed, for sure. All right, so let's talk about the Japanese beetle. What's going on with this?
Well, I mean, this is an introduced pest that's, been in North America for over a century, but just the past couple of years, it's really gotten a foothold in the maritime provinces, and it has become, I would say, probably the biggest pest of summer in terms of the fact that it chews up more than 300 types of garden plants, including vegetables like beans, roses, shrubs and trees, ornamental plants like coneflowers. So it's everywhere, and it's hard to stop.
Okay, and where did it come from? How was it introduced to the region?
Yeah, I mean, introduced accidentally, comes from Asia, the Japanese beetle. They're very easy to identify, though, if you're like wondering, you see a bug in your garden and you're thinking, is this Japanese beetle? They're about 1 centimeter long, and they kind of appear metallic. They're a bit like green and copper colored, so very shiny and very easy to identify. And often there's several clustered, say in like a rose flower, for example, or on, the leaves of your bean plants. And then, you might be digging in your lawn, or, because they do cause brown patches in your lawn as well, and you'll see the white grubs. They kind of look like June bug larvae as well. They're like a white grub that's in the curled C shape. Pretty easy to identify. And in terms of the lawn damage, again, brown patches for sure. And then the gardens, you're getting the fact these beetles are crawling over the leaves and the flowers, and they're skeletonizing the leaves. So they're eating all that yummy little tender tissue between the leaf veins, and so they're just leaving those tougher leaf veins, and it looks like the leaves have been skeletonized. So even if you don't see the adults, you can still kind of tell by the damage what is doing it.
Are there any particular areas in the region where they're more prevalent, or are they is it widespread right across the whole region?
Well, I know people have been talking about them for 7 or 8 years. People in Halifax, there's pockets here and there where they've been bad. And I had been lucky until about 3 years ago when I spotted the first one. And so I knew it wouldn't be long. And, 2 years ago, they were terrible. We had a double population of them, just the way they ended up hatching. So we had a lot. And then last year, they were quite bad. And this year, I'm seeing a few, but I don't see too many yet. But I'm getting so many complaints from gardeners. So, they're pretty bad, widespread throughout the Maritimes. And, I mean, they're also getting worse in New Brunswick as well. So it's not just Nova Scotia that's getting hit. And they will continue to move because the adults fly. So, they'll keep coming in and they'll keep migrating. So it's just something we have to learn to live with. And, if you do want to control them, there are some things you can do. And there's even, if you're choosing new landscape plants for your garden, there's certain things that are less susceptible to Japanese beetles. So don't plant roses, plant things like lilacs. They don't really love lilac. So I would be thinking of things like that to plant that they don't like if I'm choosing new shrubs and trees.
Okay, what are some ways to deal with them?
Yeah, you know what? People don't like to hear this, but the best way to deal with them, I find, is hand picking. So put on a pair of garden gloves, get a bucket of soapy water, and go out in the evening is ideal, or early morning when they're a little more lethargic. Because if you try it right now in the middle of the day, they're just going to fly away before you can even grab them. So use your gloved hand, when they're a little more, slow moving, throw them in your bucket of soapy water. And doing that repeatedly will put a big dent in the population. Pretty soon, July is peak season for them, early August. Soon they're going to lay the eggs in the soil. And then you won't see any more really in your garden, but the larvae are going to hatch in the soil. They're going to be a couple inches down, and they'll come out again next year. So another thing you can do is apply, it's an organic bacteria that affects grubs, caterpillars, and there's one that works for Japanese beetle larvae, and you can apply it in late summer, usually late August, early September, preferably after a rain. You can put this in a watering can, water it in the soil. Nematodes are like tiny little microscopic kind of worms, really, and they'll parasitize and eat the grubs in the soil. So that will also help destroy the population. But as I mentioned earlier, Todd, they fly, so that does not mean you're going to get more flying in next year, but you will get rid of a lot of the ones that are living on your property.
Right. How about things you can buy, like traps and things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So traps, I always say don't fall into the trap of traps.
Yeah.
And a lot of people love their traps, and they will fill up with Japanese beetles so quickly. Absolutely, they will. But the problem is you're luring beetles to your yard. So, I mean, if you can put them at the part of your yard where you don't have any plants, and then they'll leave your garden and go to the trap, that can work okay, but you're still going to be luring more beetles. And, the university studies have shown that 75% of beetles will go to the trap, but they're bringing more into your garden, and anything around that trap will be quite eaten, because sometimes these aren't the best flyers, and they're just going to miss the trap, and then they're going to go on whatever plant you got nearby. If you do use a trap, hang it relatively low 18, 24 inches, because these aren't, again, great flyers. But I don't use traps. I'm not going to use traps because I don't want to introduce more beetles to my yard. So, yeah, I don't recommend them, but some people really like to use them. So I'd say it's up to you, but I'm going to use hand picking, which is more effective.
Okay, is there a cycle here in which in 5-10 years or some type of cycle in which they'll naturally lessen, or are they here to stay?
If only, Todd.
Yeah.
Yeah, sadly, no. These are here to stay, so we have to learn how to deal with them. And this is, again, where picking things that they don't really like to eat comes in handy as well. Just learning what to do when you see them. Honestly, I have a huge vegetable garden. I have lots of ornamental plants. I'm planting a lot more native plants in my garden because they really don't seem to bother a lot of the native plants, like the milkweeds and things. Yes, I see them here in my vegetable garden, sometimes on dahlias, sometimes on like my bean plants, sometimes on zinnias. If I see them, I'll go up in the morning or evening. I'll clean them off with my gloved hand, but I'm not sweating it. It is what it is. You know what I mean? Yes, some of the leaves are going to look a little messy, but that's just the way it is. And, I'm not going to spend all my time trying to eradicate this pest from my garden because it's very difficult to do.
Okay, what else is going on as far as the summer and go? It's awfully dry out there, right? Is that impacting people's gardens or what?
Yes. Yeah. It's so dry. It's so dry. Every rainstorm seems to hit the valley and just offshore, and nothing for us. Yeah. My garden is so dry. I am going to go deep water it shortly. That's all you can do. There's no rain really in the forecast. Maybe a spotty shower tomorrow night if we're lucky, but we need a deep rain because we're entering drought territory. So keep deep watering, a couple times a week if you can. And I am also planting. I'm planting more things now to harvest into fall. This is when we can put in, carrots, beets, daikon radishes. In a couple weeks, I'll put more lettuce and spinach and arugula down, and turnips and little cherry type radishes. So there's still things you can plant now. If you have some seeds, you could put in a couple zucchini plants. They only take 50 days to go from seed to harvest. You still got time for that. Short season cucumbers, like quick snack, you could plant seeds for that. So you still can do things now like that. But yeah, watering is definitely important in this thirsty time.
How much watering should you do? How do you know when you've done enough?
Yeah, deep watering is good because you want the roots to go deeper into the soil to make the plants more drought resistant. So at least an inch every time you water. So I have this little hollow around each of my tomato plants that's about an inch deep, and I fill it up. And then I'll come back again and just fill it up again. And I'll do that twice a week right now for my tomato plants and my pepper plants. Cucumbers get watered 2 to 3 times a week because they're very thirsty. Same with anything in that family. Squash, winter squash, zucchini, cucumbers, they're getting watered a couple times a week for sure. Anything that I've just planted, the new seeds going in, I'm making sure that soil stays lightly damp. And there's a few tricks you can do. You could put some row cover over top to prevent the soil from drying out quickly. You could sprinkle a little straw to help keep the soil damp. But yeah, it's a challenging time. Containers, keep them well watered. We're talking every day, sometimes twice a day if it's going to be 30 plus degrees. It's a challenge right now with this type of drought we're having.
What time of day is best to water?
Morning, if you can do it, but the best time is when you can, but morning is best because you're hydrating those plants for the day. If you're watering at night, make sure you water the soil, not the plant, because you don't want those leaves wet overnight. That can promote the spread of fungal diseases. So try to water in the morning. If you can't, water in the evening and water at the base. Don't use a sprinkler to water. It's going to waste most of that water. It's going to run off. It's going to evaporate. Use a long-handled watering wand. Use a hose nozzle. You can use soaker hoses as well. Run them along the soil and then just turn it on for 15, 20 minutes in deep water. Lots of easy ways to irrigate for sure.
Yeah, so sprinkler just wastes too much water? Is that what?
Yeah. Especially if you're doing it this time of day. Half of that water is going to evaporate, and the rest is going to lie on the leaves of the plant and evaporate. Yeah. And also, you don't want to get the leaves wet if you can help it. So sprinkler is the least efficient and effective and healthy way for your plants to water.
Yeah, I didn't know that you're not supposed to water the leaves themselves.
Yeah, you don't want to water the leaves. You want to water the soil. Yeah, there's certain fertilizers you can do a foliar fertilize, but I think most gardeners, when they're fertilizing the soil, and the plant will take it up through the roots. And that's a good idea now too, Todd. I'm using a fish fertilizer or a liquid kelp, and I'm giving everything a boost, my midsummer boost, just to make sure those plants, produce the harvest that I want them to do. So it's a great time to fertilize too.
All right, what's going on with you? Do you get a new book coming out, or what do you have cooking?
You sound like my editor. I might. I don't know. I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about it. I mean, my website, Savvy Gardening, we get like 1.5 million visitors a month looking for gardening advice. That's awful fun.
Yeah.
And so, I'm just busy writing articles and for magazines and newspapers and, maybe working on a book project, working for my website and doing stuff like that.
Okay, Niki, thanks so much. Good chat.
Thank you, Todd. Take care.
All right, take care. Niki Jabbour, our award-winning author and of 4 gardening books and a gardening expert, and her website as well, which is good, massive traction. And of course, hosted the Weekend Gardener here on our radio station for 15 or so years, and always a good chat. Nova Scotia has the lowest food price inflation, but food insecurity remains high. We'll discuss this when we come back. Canadian food prices continue to rise, with the average grocery bill totaling 3.4% more in May 2025 compared to the year prior, according to the Consumer Price Index. But an analysis says that Nova Scotia experienced the slowest increase in the past year. Over the last 12 months, food prices have increased 2.7% in Nova Scotia, a whole percentage point lower than neighboring New Brunswick, which experienced the greatest increase. Joining us to discuss all of this is Ash Avery, Executive Director of Feed Nova Scotia. Ash, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so the news is not all that good, though, for a lot of people, right? I mean, food insecurity is a real issue here in Nova Scotia.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you said, the headline this week is that Nova Scotia saw the slowest increase in food prices across the country, so just 2.7% over the past year. But while that might seem like good news, the reality, unfortunately, is it's not nearly enough to ease the pressure that people are feeling.
Okay, so what's this mean for food banks and all that here in the province?
Yeah, I mean, food insecurity is about income. It's not about grocery prices. So even with slowing food inflation, Nova Scotia still has some of the highest rates of food insecurity out of the provinces in Canada. So over 29% of our population is food insecure. Over 71,000 children in Nova Scotia experience food insecurity, which is the second highest child food insecurity rate in the country. So what this tells us is that food insecurity isn't just about what groceries cost, it's about what people can afford.
Okay, how about food bank usage here in the province? The numbers are going up, or where are the numbers here?
So at Feed Nova Scotia, we're doing everything we can to meet the need that continues to rise year over year. So in June, we distributed over 500,000 pounds of food to food banks, meal programs, and shelters across the province. And those services supported an average of 1,600 people per day and about 34,000 people total per month when you count each member in the household. So this represents a 52% increase from just 2 years ago. So, the need is accelerating. And of course, our resources at Feed Nova Scotia are finite, as are food banks and meal programs across the province are really feeling the pressure.
So how are food banks keeping up then? What's going on? How are they dealing with this?
Certainly they're doing their best. We're trying to, provide more resources to them. They're trying to source their own resources within community. We're hearing from a lot of communities who are trying to open food banks in response to the increased demand. But also, the bottom line is that food banks are not the solution to food insecurity. They are a stopgap. So they are, doing crucial work out there responding to the immediate need. But we know the real drivers are low income, unaffordable housing, low housing stock, high cost of living. And we know that, more and more Nova Scotians are feeling that. And really the gap is widening in terms of, what people can afford and what they can access with income. We know that, there are just a number of root causes, and food insecurity is going to continue to persist regardless of whether food prices rise or fall.
Yeah, I was going to say I don't think you'll be able to work anytime soon, unfortunately, right?
No.
Yeah. Okay, so volunteering and all that stuff, that's all integral. That's all a key part to food banks. And I guess I'm sure that you would encourage people to volunteer with food banks, and tell us about that role that volunteers can have.
Absolutely. Such a critical part of the food banking system and food insecurity system in Nova Scotia is, reaching out into your community, finding ways, if you are able to, support the work that is happening. All of the food banks across Nova Scotia are run on volunteers and require volunteer support. And even here at Feed Nova Scotia, we are actively recruiting right now for volunteers to, assist us in the warehouse and out in the community with events to raise money to be able to support the vital work across the province.
Okay, and summer food, or rather school food programs aren't available in the summer, and this leads, I'm sure, or it adds to the challenge, right?
Yeah, 100%. Summer intensifies the struggle. It makes things harder on families. Certainly, those families who did have access to the school food program don't have access to that during the summer. Some schools have food pantries and food banks that offer services, which certainly are not available in the summer. There are some services that do remain. Schools Plus is one of them, so families can connect with those services if they are available in their communities. But for the most part, a lot of the supports and services either pause or are reduced, and families are then left trying to fill those gaps alone. So we hear from, parents who are skipping meals to feed their kids, seniors who are just making impossible choices between food and medication. And, that is what food insecurity looks like in 2025.
And of course, food choices, people eat less healthy because we know that when it comes to price and price point, for the most part, it costs less, or it costs more to eat healthy, right? This is another challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said before, people have to make difficult choices, and sometimes that means sacrificing meals altogether or sacrificing, food that is less healthy or has, more toxic ingredients in it. So, contributing overall to the health of our community.
Okay, Ash, appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
All right, take care. Ash Avery, Executive Director of Feed Nova Scotia. And yeah, it's more and more people each passing week find themselves in a position where they have to use the food bank. And for many people, they never thought that would happen in their lifetime. Nobody wants to use a food bank for sure, but I mean, it's thank goodness that we have food banks in our community and volunteers and people who donate, and the generosity of Nova Scotians is amazing. But you can imagine, as more and more people become stretched and their income becomes more maxed out, there's less discretionary money. There's less money that people have to donate. So it adds, and it's a cycle. It's a vicious cycle, right? More people needing the food bank, fewer people having the ability to contribute to food banks because of their financial situation. And the stress and it adds to it, and it's a real challenge, folks, that we have. Food insecurity is a real thing, and we talk a lot about affordability and a lack thereof when it comes to rental prices here in HRM. We'll talk later with Suzy Hansen, and NDP MLA, talking about the fact that, in her opinion, thousands of affordable units required to meet the need here in HRM. And this, according to a recent report, and affordability is a massive issue. Fuel prices have not really come down. They're around $1.50 a liter, something like that, and it costs. Everything is now more expensive. Dan and I were chatting before the show today, and things are basically doubled for the most part. Whether it be dining out or whether it be your grocery bills or whatever it is, it seems to me that is where we're at. The things have kind of doubled in price in the past 5-6 years. Not for everything, of course, but for a lot of things. That seems to be the number. And has your salary doubled? Certainly not. We know that it has not. So when it comes to affordability, folks, what are you doing to deal with the challenge of affordability and cost increases in your daily budget, in your weekly budget? Something that you might want to talk about when we open the phone lines, which we're doing now, or whatever else you have in your mind. The way to reach us is 902-405-6000. Freedom of speech. This is something else that we talked a lot about yesterday and we'll continue to get into today. Of course, so it sparked the conversation was the cancellation of the controversial singer out of the United States, country singer. He was scheduled to perform last night at the National Historic Site here in Halifax. It was canceled last minute by Parks Canada. They revoked the permit. The show went on at a private location in another part of the province. But one of the things that I asked you to weigh in on yesterday was, is this an issue with freedom of speech or freedom of expression here in Canada, or is this absolutely something that the federal government has the responsibility to oversee? Does the federal government have a responsibility to safeguard values when it comes to inclusion, acceptance of all, regardless of sexual orientation, race, skin color, etc.? If so, is there room for expression for those who do not agree with some of these values, like same-sex marriage and abortion, and of course religious freedom of an expression is part of the formula as well? Give us a call or whatever else you've got in your mind. 902-405-6000. Again, 902-405-6000. Your calls when we come back. All right, taking your calls. The way to reach us is 902-405-6000. Again, 902-405-6000. What is on your mind today? Give us a buzz. Again, 902-405-6000. By the way, tomorrow we will be able to respond and react to the fact that the ruling on the five former, or the decision by the judge in connection with the sexual assault trial of five former members of Canada's World Junior Hockey Team. And should be very interesting. Either way, consent is at the core of all this. We will be chatting with Wayne McKay tomorrow at about 10:15 about all of this. We'll get his reaction to this, law professor emeritus at Dalhousie University, and perhaps some of you might want to weigh in on this as well. Also, something that perhaps some of you might want to talk about today and tomorrow is the sentencing hearing for Freedom Convoy leaders Tamara Leach and Chris Barber. That continues today after they were found guilty of mischief. Prosecutors are expected to respond to defense submissions before the judge begins her deliberations. The Crown is seeking a prison sentence of 7 years for Leach, 8 years for Barber, who is also found guilty of counseling others to disobey a court order. Leach and Barber were convicted for their roles in 2022 in the 2022 protest against COVID health measures that gridlocked the downtown core of the nation's capital for weeks. And look, folks, this is another controversial issue. Some people feel as though that they deserve to get whatever the prosecution is calling for. Others feel as though it is deeply inappropriate for the charge of mischief. And again, we welcome your opinion on all of this. So what's your take on that, or whatever else you've got in your mind? The way to reach us, as mentioned, is 902-405-6000. Again, 902-405-6000. Freedom of expression and freedom of choice. These are tough issues, not tough issues, but they're complex issues because they overlap in a lot of ways with a lot of different things, including religious freedom and religious expression. And a lot of this came to the forefront this week by this planned concert by this American country singer who's a mega supporter and has controversial views, depending on, I guess, on your viewpoint. I believe they're controversial. Speaks out strongly against LGBTQ rights, along with abortion rights, and other very serious social viewpoints in which I don't agree with, and many of you don't agree with, but not everybody agrees with that. Some people think that he has the right to feel that way. And of course, his permit to perform at the national park in here in Halifax was pulled at the last minute at the York Redoubt. It was revoked after a lot of backlash from a lot of people, and the federal government, or whoever makes a decision on behalf of the federal government, decided that it was not going to be an appropriate show at a federal park. Subsequently, shows have been canceled in Charlottetown, Moncton, and Quebec City as well, as permits have been revoked. Not sure if they're going to get other locations or not. But it sparked the conversation yesterday about freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and does the federal government have a responsibility to safeguard what many of us would call values? Because what it says are values, not everybody agrees with those values, like same-sex marriage. Again, the law is the law, and we know that. And same as abortion, right? And pro-choice, the law is there. And the government of the day, of course, is the overseer of those laws and can change those laws. So what are your thoughts on the overlap, I guess, of the government of the day and safeguarding values, and do you think that it has the responsibility to do so? And is this an example of that by not allowing a show like this on federal grounds? Is this something that you support? Is this the right move? I personally feel that it is. That's my opinion. But I get it that this is subjective in many ways. So what's your take on this? Did the government was the right decision made by not allowing the show to go ahead here in Halifax at the national park? 902-405-6000, or does it in some way violate freedom of expression? Also, some other things you can get to. Strong mayor powers back in the news, because earlier in the show I chatted with Patrick Sullivan of the Halifax Chamber of Commerce, and they polled their members. They sent out a questionnaire to their members asking about strong mayor powers, and largely their members were split on whether or not Andy Fillmore should get strong mayor powers here in Halifax, which I found interesting. What are your thoughts on that, folks? Do you think that strong mayor powers is something that would you support that? Is this something that is needed here in HRM? Is this version of council in need of having some type of oversight or rather power by the mayor in order to get things done? Or do you think that it's undemocratic in some way, and that council should be, as an entity, allowed to govern in the way that it has under the current charter? 902-405-6000, that is the way to reach us. Again, 902-405-6000. Also, EV mandates, another thing that you can talk about. The reason why I bring this up is because I saw a story in the Chronicle Herald this morning. The federal environment minister appears committed to keeping the EV mandates in place. And the EV mandate, of course, will require all manufacturers of new vehicles in Canada to, by the year 2035, to be producing all EVs. This despite the fact that EV sales are down and the trends are not good. And it looks like in the United States that they're not going to be making any type of resurgence anytime soon. And the auto industry is reeling right now for a variety of reasons, including tariffs. And is this realistic that EV mandates would be functional and good for the industry and the country? Or is this a politician out of touch with reality, driven by ideology? 902-405-6000. Let's go to the phone. Let's talk to David. Hello, David.
Hi, Todd. Yeah, I just wanted to comment on a guest you had last week, Todd Burgess from Forest, Nova Scotia. He was just sort of talking about biofuels, sort of sawdust, wood chips, and all the sort of waste products from wood, and using that for heat and electricity production. And I just wanted to say, how important I think that is and beneficial in terms of us achieving our environmental goals. Just the sheer abundance of the fuel. I just recently cut a couple branches in my backyard for my neighbor. I basically got the equivalent anyway of 2 armloads full of of firewood plus about 2 green bins of, branches, sticks, and all that kind of stuff, which if that, just composted the way it typically is going to give off a lot of methane, which is, much worse than CO2 for greenhouse gas emissions. But, this is all useful fuel that could actually be put to work. So, what he talked about was using those fuels in district heating systems, which is basically a form of combined heat and power, which is something we've talked about. So when you generate electricity in a typical electrical generator, you give off a lot of heat, same as your car. You know what I mean? There's a lot of heat that's got to get radiated away. So in contrast, a district heating system is about 90% efficient, where a centralized power plant is about 33% efficient. So you're getting, 2.5 times the output from the same amount of fuel. So I think where these systems are important is just helping us to eliminate our centralized coal plants, substituting with a much cleaner fuel source, but a much more efficient fuel source. So as an example of why this is important, he referenced Heat New Glasgow, which basically the town of New Glasgow is looking at putting in a district heating system powered by biofuels. So what this would do, it would basically, according to the website, it would provide the town with 90% of their energy. But heat and hot water is about 60% of total energy use. So it would provide 90% of the town with 60% of the energy that they need from energy that otherwise would have been wasted. In contrast, if you put solar panels on 90% of the buildings in the town, you would actually only be getting about 20% of the town's total energy needs. So just the sheer scale of this. But the thing is, it's not sort of like one or the other. The way I look at these systems is sort of the backbone of the energy system, because once you get that heat and hot water part of the equation sourced, it's actually quite easy to provide the rest of the electrical needs through your alternative sources like solar and wind and that kind of thing. So, I think there's just tremendous potential with these systems just for us to get away from our inefficient, centralized and dirty coal power plants, provide that sort of fundamental backbone, stability, redundant power supplies and all that kind of stuff that's going to complement our use of wind and solar in this province. So, I think it's a positive step, and I hope to hear more about it in the future.
Okay, thanks, David. Appreciate it as always.
Right on.
All right, take care. 902-405-6000. James, hello.
Yes, hi. I just wanted to comment on the strong mayor proposal.
Sure.
I'm going to put in a plug for a column today by John Dumont in the Herald. He, I think, very eloquently explains why it's a bad idea. And it boils down, at least as I understand it, and I support, having diverse voices leading to making decisions is a good thing, because you hear all points of view, then they weigh the different points of view and they make a decision. Having one person get to make important decisions, such as, I could go on and on, but anyway, giving the mayor the power to override the city council, HRM council, to impose his particular view, which of course is in accordance with the premier. Let's call a spade. They're best buds. It doesn't allow different voices to have an impact on the decision. And I'm not saying HRM Council makes the perfect decision every time, but for a process issue, from a process perspective, it's better to have more voices than fewer. They have an official opposition in the legislature.
Right.
You have to hear both sides of an issue. But if you have a premier who thinks X, Y, Z, and you have a mayor who is meeting privately with the premier and thinks X, Y, Z, that's not necessarily the best. That's not really democracy.
Well, James, don't we basically
in opposition?
But James, don't we basically have that in with the provincial government when it comes to the premier with the supermajority? I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's the same thing, right? If the premier wants something done, or if he wants a decision made, then it happens, right? Because would the rest of council not kind of serve as that sober second voice or the opposition? Again, I'm not advocating for or against this, but I'm just saying that we're already doing this provincially, are we not? And federally when a majority's in place.
I mean, yes, British parliamentary democracy, and Nova Scotia right now, supermajority. On the other hand, they introduce bills, and they're going to have to introduce some interesting bills in the fall to do what they want to do. You at least get to hear from the opposition, and there's debate, vigorous debate. But the way they want to, this super mayor or power mayor thing, the rest of council doesn't count.
Well, we don't know. We don't know what it would look like logistically or how operationally it would be rolled out. We don't know that yet, right? So
that's correct. We don't know the exact details, but the way it's going in Ontario, the mayor, I don't know. If we've got it provincially due to supermajority, I would suggest it's even more important to have diverse voices at the table casting votes municipally. That's sort of democracy.
Yeah.
In other words, everything's not done in back rooms and then just announced to the public because, that's Churchill said, as John Dumont pointed out today, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, James, appreciate the call.
Anyway, thanks.
All right, take care. 902-405-6000. We'll continue with your calls when we come back. Continuing with your calls, way to reach us is 902-405-6000. Got open line for you folks. Give us a buzz. Again, 902-405-6000. What is on your mind today? Shelley, hello.
Hi, Todd. How are you?
I'm well, you?
I hope you're healthy and feeling great.
Yep.
Love you having a great show again today.
Thank you.
I have two questions for you.
Okay.
One is regarding, you mentioned at the earlier start of your show, you were going to have somebody on, I believe tomorrow, regarding the building of these new homes and new apartments.
Suzy Hansen will join the show, NDP MLA, talking about it.
The cost of living, low-rise apartments.
Affordable housing, yes.
Yeah, affordable housing. I'm wondering, my question is, what happens, like a lot of these developers are given money up front to say that they're going to put 9 units in that are cost of living. Mm-hmm. But when they get 3/4 of the way through the building, they decide, I'm over budget, I can't afford it, so we can't do that anymore. When that happens, do they have to pay that money back? That's my question.
I don't have the answer for you. I can ask Suzy that.
Remember late last fall, the development that's gone on the Bedford Highway right next to where the old food bank used to be?
Yeah.
He was given X number of dollars to have 16 units that were cost of living, a low rent. Sorry, you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. And when he got like 3/4 of the way through the building, he decided we can't afford this. We can no longer do this. So the units were canceled and put to a higher rate. When that happens, do these people have to pay that money back? That's what I'm wondering about.
That's a good question.
Ask her tomorrow.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Because it's happening all over the city. They're promising these units, and when they're built, they're not there. My second question to you is the ATV Supper Hour News. It's been cut in half, the Atlantic program, right? Yeah. Half an hour. Since that happened, this is probably none of my business, but I'm just curious about it. Since that happened, are these reporters, Maria and Todd and the gang who does the half an hour show, are their salaries cut in half as well?
No, absolutely not. Why would they be, right? First of all, Todd Battis does these 6 to 7 newscast on CTV.
Yeah, well, I'm talking. I meant Maria, and I don't remember the other.
I think she does it basically alone at this point. Does she not? I think.
Maybe.
With Kaylin, I think Mitchell stepped in and kind of.
No, I was just thinking, since it's only half an hour now, she's only got to do the show for half an hour. Do they still get their full salary?
Well, I have no idea. I'm sure they would. I'm sure that they're worked plenty hard. I don't think anybody in the media is not earning their paycheck at this point, Shelley. I would say.
I just thought about that. Since it's half an hour, do they still get the full salary? That's
all right.
But the most important one is regarding the rent. Ask her tomorrow when you talk to her.
Okay, and it's later today. I'm talking to her. Thanks for the call. Take care. 902-405-6000. That's the way to reach us. Again, 902-405-6000. Jim's giving us a call. Hello, Jim.
How you doing, Todd?
I'm well, you?
Good. Listen, I've been listening to the mayor stuff again.
Yeah.
And I like to flip it around if we can, maybe discuss that. what would we do if we didn't have a mayor? Do we need a mayor? I mean, in the present situation, it looks like we don't really need a mayor. And the mayor gets elected by, as you know, like we've been repeatedly saying, by the majority of HRM voters, right, for the whole area.
Yeah.
So he goes to council, and what does he become in the present council? It looks as though he's just more or less, and past mayors too. They chair a meeting, and that's it. And then they expect him to go and cut ribbons all day. Yeah. So let's flip that around and say, could we just have a council and they can elect somebody to chair the meetings 1 month and elect somebody else under the council to chair the meetings the next month? Would it be any better?
What are your thoughts, Jim, when certain councillors have said that Mayor Savage didn't need strong mayor powers because he was a strong mayor? What's your take on that?
Well, I think the ones that are saying that were probably pro-Savage.
Yeah.
I wasn't impressed with Savage on a lot of issues. Yeah. He's the guy that brought the bike lane strategy. He's the guy that said he wants to make Halifax the bike city of the world, or whatever he said. It was quite dominant what he said. And look where we are now. No, I think you need I think the situation should be that the mayor, being elected by the majority of the taxpayers that vote, or whoever votes, should have the ability to at least present a budget in the new mayor system, if it comes to fruition, where the mayor can actually bring a budget that is based on what the majority of residents, or at least some of them, have put forth for the mayor to come forward. Because a lot of the individual councillors run on their own constituency issues, like Spryfield. Patty Cuttle ran on issues for Spryfield. So Austin ran on issues particularly for Dartmouth. And then they get in a circle, and then all of a sudden they're going to start discussing issues outside their constituency. And the only one you can address that with, it would be the mayor, because he has the vote of all the residents of the HRM. And it doesn't seem that works in our system in 2025. What do you think?
Well, look, I understand what you're saying. I do. I get it. I understand. But look, I also, Jim, can appreciate some people's concerns that too much power by the mayor, and based on his cozy relationship, it appears, to Tim Houston, that is of concern, right?
I think that the issue of the power business, I think I'd be comfortable with. I can't remember the fraction that it would be, but I think on some of the bigger issues, I think the members of council, you'd have to have a 2/3 majority could veto, or is it 1/3? I can't remember. If you had you could still have a veto power, but it would be something like if when the mayor brings his budget or her budget toward the council, there would still be an allowance for a veto.
Well, I think that would be based on the legislation that would be tabled. We don't know those details yet. So perhaps checks and balances could be in place like that. For sure.
Yeah, I hope there is. I hope there is still a veto. I mean, at least that might assuage some of the concerns. Yeah. But as far as the relationship goes with the premier, I'm not so sure it's that cozy. I don't know if I'd use that word cozy. I think that there has to be a better relationship with the premier of the province, no matter who it is, because they do have issues regarding housing and what have you. But what I've seen in this last council is that, I mean, people don't have to, when you look at the bike versus car issue, I don't think people are looking at our streets in general just to realize how small they are. But that bike issue certainly stepped forward as the dominant issue. When last winter it was housing. When I ran for mayor, it was housing in particular, and it was for the homeless. What happened to that? What happened to transit?
Yeah, for sure.
I don't hear anything about transit, do you?
Yeah, that's true. Okay, Jim.
So we've lost issues. Anyway,
okay, thanks for the call, pal. Take care.
Take care.
902-405-6000. We've got open lines for you, folks. Give us a call if you'd like to get in on the in on the chat. 902-405-6000. Open line for you. We'll give us a call. We'll be back. All right, continuing with your calls, 902-405-6000. Give us a buzz. Again, 902-405-6000. What would you like to get into today? Again, 902-405-6000. Some of you talking about strong mayor powers back in the news cycle. Based on the Halifax Chamber of Commerce President and CEO Patrick Sullivan's chat that I had with him earlier in the show. They sent out a survey to their members recently asking about strong mayor powers and basically split on whether or not members think it's a good idea or not, which I think would probably be accurate and reflective of the general population as well, perhaps. What are your thoughts on that, or whatever else you've got in your mind? We talked a lot about freedom of expression, freedom of speech this week, and yesterday in particular, with this cancellation of this concert here in Halifax. You know the backstory on that one. So perhaps that might be something that you want to talk about. You've got the sentencing hearing of the two Freedom Convoy organizers in Ottawa. That is something else perhaps you might want to get in on. 902-405-6000. Will's giving us a call. Hello, Will.
Hey, how are you?
I'm well, you?
I'm all right. I'm just calling to talk about the strong mayor powers or super mayor powers or whatever we're calling them.
Sure.
My thoughts are in this, I do have a strong opinion about whether it should happen or not, but sort of regardless of that, my thing is that during the last provincial election and the last municipal election, I cast my votes based on the current system that we had in place. It seems to me that our premier and our current mayor probably had this in the works prior to both of those elections. Neither one of them campaigned on it. My thing would be, why not, if we're going to do this, if we're going to pass this legislation for super mayor powers, why not have it come into effect after the next municipal election? So at least I and every other voter are casting a vote knowing what powers I'm bestowing on somebody.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. I think that is something that I think I can certainly understand why people feel that way, for sure. And I agree with you. I don't think this was something that somebody had the idea after the elections of the provincial and municipal elections, which were fairly close together. I think that this was something that was discussed and they talked about it, and the timing of it is a little suspect, for sure. I would agree that's a legitimate issue. I would agree with you.
And I'd be curious to know, I'd love to have that question put to the premier and to the mayor. And just, if you want it to be a democracy and have me casting my vote, knowing what I'm casting my vote for, I'd also like to know what any other listener that calls in with comments about this particular thing, I'd love to know what they think about that as well.
Yeah, and the mayor, of course, or rather the premier with his bullish stance on natural resources, that is something that he didn't campaign on either. So there are other issues as well, which makes you kind of think, why did he not campaign on some of these huge issues which could impact the province and the city in a big time way? So I agree with that. I think that you make a decent point, Will. I agree.
Well, they all say that the voices of Nova Scotians come first, right?
Yeah.
And what greater voice do we have than with our votes?
Yeah.
So put the information on the table and let us make an informed decision.
Okay, valid point, Will. Thanks for the call.
All right,
take care. 902-405-6000. Chris is giving us a call. Hello, Chris.
Good morning, Todd. Look, I agree 100% with what Houston's doing, and I agree that I think the mayor should have more powers. But I think you'll agree with me that politicians tend to be reactive and not so much proactive, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And I think that Houston is simply being reactive and responding to a need to ground this council. They are financially out of control. I mean, Austin brought it up, Sam Austin brought it up when he was last on your show, and he tended to write the whole bicycle lane thing off debate as being, well, what's important to one group of individuals is not important to another group. Well, that may or may not be true, but there's a big group out there of individuals in HRM, very large group, as a matter of fact, that are being totally ignored, and that group are the HRM taxpayers. I'm willing to bet that every single taxpayer is concerned about the massive cost overruns and this fiscal runaway train that this council is on. And as far as Houston jumping in on this, council can't blame him for that. They brought this upon themselves. They've had opportunities to pull back for years now, and they haven't done it. People are fed up with it. The majority of people do not want bike lanes, not because it's a bike lane, but because of the massive cost of it and the overruns involved, as well as a lot of other programs. What are your thoughts on that, Todd?
Well, I think that it goes beyond that. I think for some people it is the concept of bike lanes that they don't like either. They find them distasteful for whatever reason. They feel that congestion is is being exacerbated because of it. They feel as though they won't get used. They feel as though they take away parking. So yeah, and so I think it goes beyond cost, I would say. As far as Tim Houston stepping in and kind of being the savior of the city by interjecting, I think they need to look in the mirror because they spend plenty of money themselves, and the provincial government's pretty wasteful themselves, and I think that they need to perhaps look at their own fiscal house and some of the untendered crap that goes on with this government, like hospitals and other. Well, the Auditor General report shone a bright light on fairly recently of poor mismanagement when it comes to the Houston government. So I don't think that they're standing on any holy ground either when it comes to fiscal responsibility, Chris.
No, you're absolutely right, Todd, and you can carry that through right to the top, right up to Ottawa with the feds. It's exactly the same thing. We're always going to have that in government. But this thing with the bike lanes, I agree with you to a point that people are upset about them for more than financial reasons, but it's everything that you previously mentioned as to why people are upset and don't like bike lanes, other than being the financial overrun cost of it, is exactly spot on in that those are the negative aspects, the restriction in traffic flow, taking up space that is not needed for that, and so on and so on, the way you went on about it, that's absolutely right. They're all negative results of having the bike lanes. The only positive thing about having a bike lane may be just individual to the person using the bike lane. They may feel good about using a bike lane, but that's in the vast, vast minority of people, and it's the majority. Tim Houston was elected by a vast majority. Our mayor was elected by a majority, and he is the only one, as is brought up by Jim before, and I agree with Jim's comments, and a lot of people have mentioned it, that the mayor is the only one sitting at council that was voted on by every single person throughout the HRM, had an opportunity to vote for mayor. In District 7, where I live, I had a choice of a couple of candidates for councillor, but I was voting for a councillor. I voted for mayor separately, obviously, and I did vote for Andy, even though I'm not a Liberal, but I didn't, so I don't vote party as such, and party has nothing to do with municipal, or shouldn't have anyway, I understand that. But we've got to do something about it. And there is an interesting statistic out when it comes to getting a majority of votes on any issue. The greater the number making the decision over the number 7, it gets exponentially harder to get a majority on anything. And maybe that's the reason in the states where they have 9 Supreme Court justices. But there is, if you have a group of 20 people, it's harder to get a majority vote than it is if you've only got the 7 or 9 or what have you. So maybe we should look at council and trim it down a little bit, not just for that reason, but for obvious other reasons too. And we have someone brought up the point of a lot of backbenchers that are sitting there not doing a hell of a lot, to be honest, that we see at least, or think that they don't do a hell of a lot. They're not ministers or deputy ministers or what have you. Maybe get rid of our council altogether and put some of these people in. I mean, we're voting on 3 different levels of government: municipal, provincial, and federal. We're a small population. Do we need involvement from 3 different levels of government when every single one of them tends to blame the other when something goes wrong, or when they need something, they look to the other level of government to give it to it? You know, so I mean, I have in District 7, I have a councillor that doesn't even live in my district. I have an MP that doesn't live in my district, and I have an MLA that I've never seen in my life, doesn't make herself known to us or accessible to us or so on. So from my standpoint personally, living in District 7, to have one of the MLAs or one of the MPs or whatever that are backbencher running my city situation, the municipality here, wouldn't bother me in the least. As a matter of fact, it's going to save money for sure, and I think we might get a better result out of it.
Okay, Chris, appreciate the call.
Thank you, Todd.
All right, take care. 902-405-6000, that's the way to reach us. We'll continue with your calls when we come back. All right, continuing with your calls, 902-405-6000. Again, 902-405-6000. Gloria's giving us a call. Hello, Gloria.
Hi, Todd. I'm waiting on this decision here. That's not why I'm calling, but I just read where the judge said she didn't find EM's evidence credible. I'm predicting they'll be acquitted.
Wow.
Which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's not why I called.
Okay.
I called Ted. I called Todd. I have read the last 2 columns by John Dumont. Mm-hmm. I will be willing to bet that he has never watched a council meeting. I would be willing to bet that he is buddies with Mason and Morse and Clary. I'll make that statement based on the comments that he makes in his column. The one meeting he commented on was the one that I watched where they were criticizing the mayor for writing a letter and demanding that he tell them what was in the letter, or they would ploy pop it. He didn't mention that. The other thing, Todd, the mayor is said to be cozy because he talks to the premier. Savage wouldn't do that. Savage played the old Liberal role that he would not talk to the Tory premier. Savage, I served with Savage, and I was not a big fan of the Savages after John Savage promised us in a letter that he would not push amalgamation. And as soon as he got over there, he did. But I respected Mike Savage, and I worked with him. And I never once went outside while I was on council and talked negatively about him. I didn't vote for Andy Fillmore, but I see what he's doing, and I called him and said, prove yourself, Andy. I'm willing to give you a chance. And I think he's trying to prove himself. But this dysfunctional council is forcing the Premier's hand. The Premier doesn't want to get involved in this. He's being forced to. And as far as not talking about that election time, who knew that this crowd was going to be so dysfunctional? Who knew they were going to be out to get him? When I went over to council in 2004, the late Krista Snow told me after, the word was out that Pit Bull was coming. And they were out to get me and break me. Mm-hmm. But that didn't happen. But that's what's going on here. And it's unfortunate that the Premier has to step in here. But if he doesn't, what is in the future? And I have no axe to grind here.
Right.
Todd, none of this bunch over there ever defeated me. Mm-hmm. So I have no axe to grind. I'm using common sense, which is lacking. We had a couple of people over there who could have been leaders, Kathy Deagle-Gammon and David Hensby, but they wouldn't step up to the plate either. And that disappointed me because on any council you have to have strong, common sense voices. And that's we have three councillors who seem to be able to see the picture clearly. And the rest of them, they have their own agenda. They have their own agenda. They know who they wanted in there, and he didn't get in, so they're out. They don't like Fillmore. And when they talk, you can see. I watched Catherine Morse, and when she talks, you can just see the dislike in her voice for Fillmore. And that's unfortunate. So, like it or not, this is what has to happen so that we can bring any common sense to this council. So I hope the Premier follows through and does what he has to do. Not what he wants to do, but what he has to do. So I'll leave it with that, Todd. I'm also willing to bet that when August the 5th comes, they won't move a motion of rescission. They'll say, let the Premier do it, so that then they can badmouth him. So that's my rant for today, Todd.
Okay, Gloria. Appreciate it. Thank you.
You have a great day.
All right, take care. 902-405-6000. Joseph, hello.
Hello. Thanks, Todd, for taking my call.
Sure.
I wanted to talk briefly about the young pastor who had his concert canceled in the HRM and then went on to Shuby.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people were commenting about how Parks Canada, how could Parks Canada allow such a thing to take place? Well, for one thing, Parks Canada doesn't dictate who's allowed into the country. That's the the border services. So if he does have a criminal conviction, then I would be asking Canada Border Services, why did they let him in? The other thing I want to point out is he was here last year as well. Now, I don't agree with the young man. I don't like his views and anything like that. But, you know, I doubt that he's changed in the last year since. And the only thing that really has changed is Trump's in power. So where was the outcry last year on his views? And he was in Lower Sackville, according to his website.
Right.
And he got, you know, and last year he did 6 or 7 events across the country, right? And now I hear, you know, PEI and New Brunswick and Newfoundland, like, you know, everyone's saying, you know, you can't come into our backyard. So, you know, yeah, you know, we don't vet for MAGA coming into the country, and I don't think we should get into that.
Yeah, I think the difference this year was the fact that he was scheduled to play at the national at a federal park, right, at a Parks Canada location. That is what propelled this into controversy. Is that? Yeah.
Yes, and you know, and with Parks Canada, it would have been an event planner that would have made the submission probably about, I'll say, January, if not earlier, you know, before Trump was even in power. And because, you know, they've got some process they have to go through to make sure that the dates are clear, everything, you know, can't even speak now, is in line with their own policies. And that it would be the event planner that would have to do a lot of the vetting of the event to make sure that it was in line with what they expected. So, you know, I don't disagree with Parks Canada reaction. I know in Shuby there was some protesters that went out there. So, you know, so I don't know if there was a increased police presence, that kind of stuff, right? So it's just, I just find it odd or disconcerting that, you know, all of a sudden, like now we're going to have this outcry. Well, nobody cared last year, really.
Yeah, interesting, right? Interesting. Okay, Joseph, thanks for the call.
Okay.
All right, take care. Thanks for the calls, everybody. We appreciate it. We'll open the phone lines again on Friday, tomorrow, between 11 until 12. We know that a deal is being sought after when it comes to a tariff agreement between the United States and Canada. Mark Carney and the premiers talked at length about this week. According to Jim Stanford, who's an economist and director of the Center for Future Work, he says a bad deal with Trump is worse than no deal at all. Find out why when we come back. As trade negotiations between Canada and the United States continue to head towards the August 1st deadline, reports indicate that despite Canadian concessions, the U.S. is refusing to remove tariffs on Canadian products. Joining us to talk about all this is Jim Stanford, director of the Center for Future Work and economist. Jim, thanks for joining the show. We appreciate it, as always.
Thank you, Todd. Glad to join you.
All right, so you're of the belief that a bad deal with Trump is worse than no deal at all. Tell us why you feel that way.
Well, we're already facing Mr. Trump's tariffs in several different industries: steel, aluminum, autos, coming in on auto parts, copper. Others threatened in areas like pharmaceuticals, heavy trucks, aerospace. And then he's got a 35% base tariff that he's going to apply to everything else. So what's happening is we're seeing from the other countries that Trump is negotiating, he isn't removing those tariffs. He wants a so-called deal. And he may let, one or two concessions go, or he may reduce the official tariff rate a little bit, but you're still stuck with very punitive tariffs. And if that's the deal that's on the table for Canada, it actually does us more harm than good to accept it, because it locks in those tariffs, and then we lose our ability to oppose them or challenge them under the existing free trade agreement or at the World Trade Organization or in U.S. courts. In a way, it's us giving a seal of approval to what Trump is doing. And, in the long run, that's, I think, very negative.
Okay, but how much leverage do we have?
I think Canada's got a lot of leverage. Mr. Trump likes to say, that we don't have any cards, like it's a poker game. But in aggregate terms, in dollar terms, the Americans get as much out of the relationship with Canada as we do. It's a two-way flow. It's $1 trillion of goods and services that flows the two ways across the border. We are America's largest export market, so that's one big card to play. They are going to lose a lot of business if, in fact, we head into a real trade war. We're also a vital source of supplies and inputs and materials to the U.S. industry. Most of what we sell in America is not finished products, with a Made in Canada sticker on it on the shelves at CABCO. Most of what we sell in America are inputs and materials and parts and energy and forestry goods and commodities that are used by U.S. businesses, and they are going to suffer. In fact, they already are suffering. For example, today the CEO of Alcoa, the big aluminum company, that's a U.S. company, but they make aluminum in Canada, is begging Trump to remove Canada from the list of countries who are getting tariffed for aluminum. And that's because it's hurting U.S. business. And I think that pressure is going to grow as Americans figure out, these tariffs are not actually helping Americans. So if we sign on the dotted line now and make these tariffs permanent, we're giving away the ability to play those cards, in essence.
Okay, so why does this messaging seem to not reach Donald Trump?
Yeah, there's a good question. How do we see inside Mr. Trump's brain? He's gone one way and the other way. He's got this nickname now that he hates called Taco. Trump always chickens out because he's set these ultimatums before and set high tariffs and then backed away from the high tariffs. And the next deadline is August 1st, where he is, in theory, going to impose high tariffs on about 180 different countries all at once. The financial markets are not happy with this. American businesses are not happy with this. So whether Trump chickens out again and either delays the deadline a bit longer or reduces the tariffs remains to be seen. But, let's hope that the combination of political pressure at home, Mr. Trump's facing a lot of protests over all kinds of things right now, including the Jeffrey Epstein thing, economic problems, American companies, again, like the auto companies this week, reporting big losses because of the tariffs. So, again, he's hurting American businesses with what he's doing. And then maybe financial market pressure once these tariffs come in on August 1st. Those could be the things that finally, get Mr. Trump to back off a bit. They have got a lot at stake. They get as much as they give in world trade, the Americans do. And his sort of, bluster and bullying, I think is going to run into the economic reality that Americans will be hurt if he goes ahead with all these measures.
Okay, the fact that they've reached a deal with Japan, although it's not been ratified yet or officially signed, does that hurt or help us?
Yeah,
or neither.
It's in a way neither, because it's not a good deal. Again, it's not the sort of deal we would want. 15% tariffs on everything from Japan. Now, the great irony is you'll have cars from Japan coming into America at a 15% tariff rate. You've got cars made in Canada and Mexico made by American companies, remember, General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis. Stellantis is primarily a North American company. They're going to pay the 25% tariff? There's no way that the American companies are going to say, why are you giving Japanese-based automakers an advantage over us in a continental market that we have built together for 60 years going back to the Canada-U.S. Auto Pact. We've been trading cars and parts tariff-free. So it's just absolutely economically irrational, even from the perspective of American business. And so in this regard, the Japanese deal is quite a negative precedent. In theory, they're also going to invest half a $1 trillion, Mr. Trump said, in America, in various businesses and property and all that kind of stuff. But here's another irony, Todd. The more capital comes into America, the bigger the U.S. trade deficit becomes. That's an accounting requirement. That's how economics works. If capital comes in on the capital account, you're going to have an offsetting deficit on the trade account. So Mr. Trump is, again, trying to suck and blow at the same time here by saying we want more capital, but we want a smaller trade deficit. You literally cannot do those two things at the same time. It's the rules of accounting. So the Japanese deal, I think, is odd and contradictory and more for optics than anything else. Remember, these deals are not trade treaties. They're basically memoranda that he signed with his big Sharpie pen, and chances are they're going to get changed as we go forward.
Right. How about supply management and its role in all of this? It's considered to be a big sticking point. Is it just another excuse for Trump to not ink a deal?
No, you're absolutely right, Todd. Let's just think back to the list of so-called irritants that Mr. Trump has been raising with Canada since Inauguration Day. It started out with fentanyl. Now, there's 10 times more fentanyl that comes into Canada from the United States than goes the other way. But despite that, we have invested $1 billion in border security. Then his irritant was defense spending. Okay, we were spending 1.5% of GDP. Now we're committed to spending 5% of GDP. That's a huge change. Then his irritant was the digital services tax, a 3% tax that Canada was imposing on data streaming and web advertising and so on, of all companies, not just American. Even Canadian companies had to pay it. But we removed that. And every time we give up one of these things, he's got another item on his list. It could be supply management. It could be opening up our banking system. It could be doing away with any kind of regulations on foreign investment or American operations in Canada. So, again, trying to think that we can appease Mr. Trump by solving whatever his latest irritant is just not going to work. We can have a fine discussion in Canada as a sovereign country about the digital services tax or supply management or any of those other policies, but it should be Canadians that decide it. And if we think that that will get Trump off his tariffs, then we just have to look around the rest of the world. Every other so-called deal that he's signing has got major tariffs in it. And the idea that we can trade it away through some concessions on other items is just not happening.
Okay, so how about diversifying markets? This is something that they talk a lot about, and also reducing or tearing down interprovincial trade barriers. What are your thoughts on those?
Right.
As being strategies?
Yeah, they make a lot of sense, Todd. What they're going to do is they're going to reduce our reliance on U.S. exports. And again, we've had 30 years of continental free trade in Canada, so all of our industries are oriented around this assumption that much of what we produce is going to be sold tariff-free in the U.S. and in Mexico. And now we have to change that assumption because, again, no matter what happens, at least as long as Trump is there and as long as the U.S. Congress and the courts are letting him do this, we cannot trust anything that he signs. Even if we reach a deal on August 1st, it's not even a ratified treaty. It's going to mean very little because even the ratified treaty we have that he negotiated, by the way, the Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement in 2019, that meant nothing. So why would an August 1st memorandum mean anything? So the reality is we have to find other ways to sell our stuff, and that means selling it to other countries for sure. So we got to be aggressive in Asia and Europe and elsewhere and try and partner with those countries to say, look, Mr. Trump is screwing us all up. We gotta help each other now. Selling more stuff within Canada, of course, and also just kind of building up the domestic economy. One thing to remember, Todd, exports are very important to Canada, but 80% of our GDP is not exported. 80% of our GDP is produced in Canada and used in Canada. So things like infrastructure, things like housing, things like healthcare, these are industries that we need and that are, in a way, one step removed. Trump can't put a tariff on housing. Housing is something we build for ourselves. So, emphasizing the investment in growth and job creation in the domestic side of the economy is going to be very important as well.
Okay, so any reason for optimism here at all, Jim?
Well, I am encouraged to some extent. The premiers met in Ontario this week, and Mr. Carney joined them for a day. And, the messages coming out from that meeting did seem to stress, we're not going to be rushed into a deal. We're not going to get a deal just for the sake of a deal. It has to be something that works for Canada. And I think that is the right direction. We have to be prepared to, in a way, stand on our own 2 feet. A trade war is not going to help us, but it's not going to help the Americans either. And the only way we'll get through this is if we're prepared to be confident in promoting and protecting our interests. And I did like the messaging from the Prime Minister and the Premiers on that score this week.
Hey, Jim, always a great chat. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, sir. Take care.
All right, take care. Jim Stanford, Director of the Center for Future Work and an economist. Suzy Hansen, an NDP MLA, talking about affordable housing or lack thereof when we come back. The Houston government is falling further and further behind the number of housing units needed. They have to pick up the pace, according to the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. Nova Scotia is short 12,000 new affordable housing units each year. But the government isn't meeting half of that. Joining us to discuss all of this is Suzy Hansen, NDP MLA. Suzy, thanks for joining the show.
Good afternoon, Todd. Thanks.
All right. So that kind of tells the story, does it not?
Yeah.
All right. So what's going on here? Why do you think that the government of the day is not making this a priority?
Well, I mean, if it was a priority, we would have a minister specific to housing. We don't even have a minister whose whole job is housing, and that speaks volumes to why it's not a priority for this government.
All right. So what are the priorities for this government then when it comes to all this or lack thereof?
Well, I will say, you know what? I hear from folks all the time struggling to be able to keep the roof over their head or, trying to figure out where they're going to find housing. I think, when we talk to people on the ground, it's about affordability and being able to afford their housing needs. And we know that housing is the single biggest expense Nova Scotians have. So, why aren't we making that a priority to continue to build or create affordable housing as a province?
Okay, so some of the challenges, I suppose, would be having people be able to build it, have contractors to be able to build it, to have the skilled labor to be able to build this stuff. Anything to that?
Well, I mean, I think that comes with everything, but as a priority, as we've seen this government before, break down those barriers when it comes to fracking or when it comes to stepping on the municipal government's, decisions. I think if the government really wanted to build and make a priority for affordable housing, they could do so. And they've shown that with a number of other pieces of legislation that they've just put through without any consultation and without any thought.
All right, and you in your release you talk about the government's made it easier to evict tenants. Why do you say that? Why do you feel that way?
Well, I mean, the government has had multiple times to protect renters, and we know that there are a lot of renters who do not have an affordable place to live. They could close the fixed-term lease loophole, so folks don't have to move every year. They could create residential tenancy enforcement, which was agreed upon in previous time, and we could enforce practical rent control like other jurisdictions have done.
All right. So what would you be doing if you were in government? What do you think? So the NDP would be advocating for just building up more public housing, full stop. That's what we need. That's what you're saying, right?
No, there's lots of other options. We could also, build more truly affordable housing instead of counting on developers to solve the problem, because we know that it's not their job to build. It's not their job to build housing that most working people can afford. We want to make sure that there's affordable housing, not just public housing, that's available to folks. And we've seen nonprofit groups, one like the one that was in the article, do it in a time that makes it affordable for the communities for long term.
Okay, Suzy, appreciate your time.
All right. Well, you have a wonderful day.
All right, take care. Suzy Hansen, NDP MLA. Well, let's see here. I don't think that the verdict has not come down yet from the Hockey Canada verdict. At least I don't think that it has. It has. I have not seen it. We will certainly keep an eye on it. And again, Wayne McKay will be talking about it tomorrow with. We're gonna have Wayne McKay, law professor emeritus, on at 10:15 tomorrow to break it all down. Of course, consent is at the crux of the issue. I think that the testimony has indicated that the graphic details of the case have been I don't think have been contested, but what's been contested and what's been defended, of course, is consent. And that is something that is difficult to prove, and it's difficult to to understand, and this will be again at the heart of all this. And again, Wayne McKay, law professor emeritus, will join us to talk about that tomorrow at about 10:15. And we'll certainly pass along the decision as soon as we hear it. Prime Minister Mark Carney is meeting today with Inuit leaders to discuss his government's controversial major projects legislation. And Inuit leaders say they have a lot to work through with the federal government. The meeting of the Inuit Crown Partnership Committee is being co-hosted by the president of the Inuit in Northwest Territories. Indigenous leaders have accused the federal government of failing to consult with them adequately when the legislation was being drafted and amended, and Carney has promised to hold talks with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis leaders to get input on how projects can and might proceed. In his opening remarks at the meeting with Inuit leaders, Carney said there's much work to do on closing infrastructure gaps and improving social services in the region, and warned that the Arctic security is under threat. Lots of lofty conversation and lofty words about consultation with First Nations communities. Of course, we shall see if in fact it happens. Russian officials say 48 people have died in a plane crash in the easternmost part of the country. Officials in the Amur region say all passengers and crew on board the passenger plane were killed. They say the aircraft disappeared from radar as it traveled from a city on the Russian-Chinese border to the town of Tinda. Rescuers later found the plane's burning wreckage amid dense forest on a hillside south of its planned destination. And 4 leading news organizations say their journalists in Gaza Strip are facing the threat of starvation as the Israel-Hamas war grinds on. A joint statement by the Associated Press and Reuters and the BBC says independent journalists have been the world's eyes and ears on the ground in Gaza for months now, and now they're facing the same dire circumstances as those they are covering. Gaza's health ministry says Israeli strikes have killed more than 59,000 Palestinians. Many of them were killed while seeking food, water, and other aid at controlled distribution sites. All right, a pretty gripping story coming up. We're going to talk about No Family is Immune. Nova Scotia family grieving son's death releases a short film to raise awareness about addiction. We'll talk about this when we come back. All right, the Halifax Documentary, Justin's Addiction Story, No Family is Immune, won Best International Short Documentary at the Jersey Shore Film Festival. Joining us to talk about all of this is Jacob Surette, director, and Justin's brother, and Tina Como Surette, Justin's mom. Hello to both of you.
Hey, Todd, thanks for having us.
All right, so first off, look, it's a tragic, sad story, and my deepest condolences to both of you for your immense loss. So that's first of all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, very much appreciated.
Okay, all right. So I guess, Tina, let's start with you. Give a quick overview of what happened with your son and this tragic passing of your son, if you will. Just kind of let everybody know a bit about the background, please.
Sure. So Justin, who was just an absolute great kid growing up, so funny, so kind, so generous, started battling with addiction around the age of 14. He started using cocaine at that point, and then it progressed to crack cocaine and over the years to pills too as well. He really fought hard to overcome addiction. He put himself in rehab 4 times. The first time he was 17, and he was the one making those arrangements. He just really wanted to beat this and strive for recovery. It was difficult. The years were very hard. Addiction is not pretty, and there were very, very dark and sorrowful times during those years. But Justin, his fight was just so inspirational, and we never gave up on him. We battled addiction together as a team. And sadly, last January, on January 25th of 2024, Justin was 98 days clean from crack. He was really excited to be reaching his 100-day milestone. But that evening, he took some pills to help get him through to the next day. And it's not that he took too many, but the few that he took resulted in his death from a toxic combination. He was 21 years old. And on the day Justin died, I promised him, because he had always wanted to be a counselor, he wanted to help other people through his experience. I promised him that myself and our family, we would keep spreading awareness about addiction and the all-important message that no family is immune.
Was the combination of drugs prescribed, or just tell us a little bit about that, if you will, please?
No, he did have a prescription for Valium. That was to help with anxiety, but he also sourced pills in other ways. He would purchase them from friends. He had purchased them from the dark web. Mm. There was no fentanyl in his system, but I guess it's really important, I think, for people to understand that while you can overdose from taking too many pills, that, it's always a huge risk, whatever you're putting into your body, and that, it's not anything, to be honest, that Justin had done differently over time. Unfortunately, this time it just had the most tragic outcome.
Wow. Okay, Jacob, as Justin's brother, tell us about the film and why you decided that this needed to be chronicled in this way.
Yeah, so actually it was my mom that initially had reached out, and she had saw a film that was kind of similar in sense on Sportnet, and she reached out to me, and she kind of ran the idea of something like, hey, this is something I want to create, and I think your brother's story could really resonate with some people. And right from the get-go, I was on board. We just quickly figured out what's the most efficient way to do this. What message can we get out that's in a timely manner that has the most impact? And right from the get-go, I was on board. And it's something I'm still to this day very proud of. And I still get messages day in, day out, and someone saying, hey, I watched your video, and today I beat the urge on my addiction. And just getting a little message like that is really important, because it lets you know, like, no matter what you're doing, big or small, you're still making an impact on people's lives.
Right. Tell us about the subject matter itself, or rather the what the film includes. Like, is it footage of your brother, or what's it look like?
So not necessarily like high quality professional footage of him, but we have a lot of old assets that we acquired over the years, pictures of him growing up, kind of telling him his story, explaining who he was and how you never really would have saw this coming. And then after that, we curated some scenes that my mother and brother would have loved doing, like going to the beach, going to the Cape for Shrew Lighthouse in Nova Scotia. And we had pictures of his certificate of death and stuff like that. So stuff that we definitely wanted to be vulnerable with the audience and showcasing to the highest ability and the highest emotion.
And Tina, what's it been like to see this to see this film?
Well, I remember the first time that Jacob sent me the first few images from the film when he was working on it, because we did filming over 3 weekends, but, we spent about 5 months working on this project. And it was just so emotional the first time he sent it, but emotional in a good way, because he just really captured exactly what I was hoping to portray. And we purposely decided to release the film on August 31st of last year, which is International Overdose Awareness Day. And we were expecting a good response to the video, but the response has just completely taken us by surprise. The first day it was viewed 53,000 times, and that was just from releasing it on our own social media platforms, so Facebook, Instagram, X, and YouTube. And since then, since the release, it's been viewed over 340,000 times. And what it's really helped to do, which I'm so thankful for, is it's opened up doors for me to do something else that's extremely important to me, and that is to go into schools and to talk to young people about the dangers of addiction and substance abuse. I spoke to over 2,000 students here in southwestern Nova Scotia over the winter months, and that's something that I want to keep being able to do. And I use the video in my presentations, as part of the presentation, because it just really introduces people to who Justin was and his struggles. And it also ends on an optimistic note, because we truly do hope that, Justin's story did not end with his death. And we hope that the next chapter in his life can be someone else's recovery.
Yeah, cocaine at the age of 14. I mean, you never think that. You think maybe some marijuana or something, but cocaine, like it's how does that even happen, right?
I know, and it started as marijuana, and then some people started telling me that Justin was doing cocaine, and I'm going to be honest, I didn't believe them, because it was just so completely out of character to believe that Justin would do something like this, because, he was a smart kid and he knew the risk. But he was trying to fit in with a new crowd. He also had, struggles with anxiety and depression. And I think a lot of the times he was just looking to escape those feelings that he was experiencing. And at the end of his life, even when he was doing these things, it wasn't because he was looking to get high or to have fun. It was basically to help him cope from day to day. But the crack cocaine, that was his drug of choice. But he tried and did so many things, and it was frightening. And, the saddest thing, I think, out of all of this is that at the time of Justin's death, he was actually in the most optimistic place in life that he had been in years. He was setting goals. He had plans for the summer. We talked about them the night before he died. He was so excited, and he was finally having happiness in his life again. And he, to lose him after all those years of darkness, to lose him when he was shining his brightest, made his death even more tragic.
Yeah, Jacob, as his brother, I mean, how difficult was this to witness this addiction?
Definitely extremely, and definitely, I think the hardest part when people go through addiction is when you haven't gone through it, you don't realize how many people that it affects. It doesn't just affect you; it affects your friends, your family, and it was seeing him struggle day to day, and especially my parents, watching them go through the amount of pain that they've had to go through on the journey, just everything that they have to endure is super tough and super challenging to get through.
Okay, how do people watch the film?
So we have it on a number of platforms. We have it on our social medias, Instagram, X, Facebook, and then if you go on YouTube, you can search it up on there. If you search Justin's story, No Family is Immune, it should be one of the first results.
Okay.
Yeah, I think YouTube is the easiest. Like Jacob said, it's on my YouTube channel, Tina Surette. And if you Google Justin's addiction story, No Family is Immune, it's pretty easy to find.
Okay, and we'll post it on our social media as well. Listen, thanks to both of you for doing this. I know it's difficult, and I do appreciate it. And let's hope that we can get many more views on this important film. Thanks to both of you.
Well, thank you for your time, because, everyone who helps share this story, you are also helping to be Justin's voice. And it's just such an important topic. And we truly appreciate this opportunity.
Okay. Thanks so much. Take care.
All right, thanks, Todd.
Thank you.
All right. You got it. Jacob Surette and Tina Surette. And that's a pretty powerful story. The book is called Towards Prosperity, The Transformation of Atlantic Canada's Economy, written by Don Mills and David Campbell. We'll talk about this when we come back. The book is called Toward Prosperity, The Transformation of Atlantic Canada's Economy, co-written by Don Mills, president of Crane Holdings and partner and director with CABCO Communications, former pollster, of course. And David Campbell is the other co-author, president of Jupia Consultants Economic Development Consulting Firm. And also, they are the co-hosts of the Insights podcast. So joining us to talk about this is Don Mills. Don, welcome to the show.
Todd, good to be back.
All right, so tell us about the book, Toward Prosperity.
Yeah, I'm not sure where to begin. I think, it's been a kind of a lifelong endeavor to try to understand what's going on in our region from both our perspectives. We spent our career looking at the economic condition in Atlantic Canada, trying to figure out why we trailed the rest of the country chronically year in, year out in terms of growth. So we've combined our experiences and the research that I've been doing for 40 years through the market research company that I owned to put together a book that was really broken into three sort of phases. The first phase is kind of how we got to where we are. Second phase is where we are today. Third phase is what we need to do to kind of continue the momentum that we seem to have at the moment.
All right. Why do you feel as though, and the book gets into this, what are some of the key reasons why you feel as though we're heading in the right direction?
Well, I think the biggest reason, Todd, is that we finally have reasonable population growth. We were an aging population, the oldest population in Canada. We face a crisis of labor shortages as a result of non-population growth, and that has changed over the last 5 or 6 years in particular, and that has created a lot of economic activity. And people look at the housing market and say, "Oh my God, we have a problem with the housing market." That's true, but our housing market was very weak in terms of contributing to our economy, as an example, because we had very little population growth to worry about. So, as I often say, I'd rather have the problems of growth than the problems of stagnation and decline. And that's where we were headed until we had population growth, a lot of it driven by newcomers coming from other countries, by the way, which historically we've had a very small percentage of immigrants come to this region. And that's hurt us in a number of ways. Immigrants bring new ideas and a level of entrepreneurism that is not in the native Canadians. And you can see that in the startup communities. There's a really high proportion of new startups that are being driven by immigrants. So to us, that was all very good news. And of course, then we have the whole sort of developing green energy in terms of hydrogen that's happening around the region, and now offshore wind, which is perhaps the biggest opportunity for us to become a hub region.
Okay, in innovation, you talk a lot about innovation, and in the past we've not been innovative enough, and you feel as though we are becoming that, and this ties in with what you're talking about with green innovation and all of that. So, what do you think is kind of inspiring the innovation? Is it newcomers? Is it what's going on?
Well, we've had a sort of a revitalization of the entrepreneurial ecosystem across the region. A lot of it is driven by the accelerators and incubators that have been established over the last decade or so in particular. So in Halifax, we have organizations like Cove that's dealing with, the ocean sector. We have the Verschuren Center up in Cape Breton that's looking at the bioeconomy, and they create opportunities for young people to get the help they need to develop their ideas. And here's the big thing, Todd, that is different from when I was started my company. The vision of the young entrepreneurs today is much bigger than it was in my era. They're looking to, develop goods and services for the national or international market. That is really good news because, our exports are weak, relatively speaking, in this region, and we need people to create goods that could be sold elsewhere that will create wealth and prosperity in our region. So we're seeing that happening on a kind of a significant scale now.
All right, taxation. You write about later in the book about a more competitive tax environment. Tell us more about some of the key points you're getting at taxing Atlantic Canadians.
Well, people might not realize that, but because we've had stagnant population growth across the region for, I would say at least 30 years. That means what? It means that we have, relatively speaking, the same number of taxpayers paying an ever-increasing tax bill because the demand for services go up every year, but the number of taxpayers had not been going up every year. What does that mean? It means our tax rates are now at the highest in Canada in this region. In this region, And so we're not competitive in terms of attracting either talent or investment. And now with, increasing populations, we now have more taxpayers joining the tax rolls and helping to carry the load of the tax burden. And, I think it's time that our politicians start to, think about what they can do to get our tax-based rates in line with other regions so that we are more competitive in terms of attracting talent and capital to this region.
How about tariffs and all that? I realize that this was not front and center, obviously, when you were writing the book, but what are your thoughts on this tariff war with the U.S. and its how that it might change the whole situation?
Well, I ran a business for 40 years, Todd, and there are always economic ups and downs. I always looked at the down periods as opportunities to innovate and become better. And that's the opportunity that we've been presented to within Canada in this region. And you can already see the benefits of that. We write in our books that one of the things that is really inhibiting our economy were the interprovincial trade barriers. And we recommended that we move to eliminate those. And that was before Trump was elected and the tariffs came along. And by the way, under the leadership of Tim Houston in particular, that has already started to happen on a pretty wide-scale basis. Well, that is a good place to start in terms of replacing any trade that we do with other countries. And it won't replace it all, but it will make a big difference. And it will add to productivity in our country, too, which has also been a major problem for a long time. And our region is probably the least productive in all of Canada. So, there's good news, and, there's nothing like a little kick in the pants, Todd, for us to take a look at how we're doing things and how we can do them better. And we're seeing alignment at both the provincial and federal levels, which in an unprecedented manner, to work on projects that are nation building. And the biggest one that will have an impact on this region, by the way, is creating, an environment where Canada can become an energy superpower. And by the way, we can contribute to that dream with offshore wind. Don't know if you had Peter Nicholson on your program in the past, but he wrote a report called Catching the Wind. And he said the offshore potential of wind would have the same impact on our economy in this region as oil and gas has had for Alberta and hydro for Quebec. So just think about that. And you can tell that Premier Houston has taken that to heart and has been starting to push hard for the development of offshore wind. In fact, there's sufficient opportunity to provide up to 25% of the total Canadian electricity needs. Think about that through our offshore. That's amazing. That's an amazing opportunity.
All right. How do people get the book, Don?
Well, you can get it in most independent bookstores. It's available at Costco, Indigo, on Amazon. And I would encourage people to buy the books from independent bookstores if they could, because they're all locally owned. And it would be good to support local booksellers. Okay,
Don. Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Anytime, Todd. You have a great day.
All right, take care. Don Mills. And the book is called Towards Prosperity, The Transformation of Atlantic Canada's Economy, written by Don Mills and David Campbell. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. I'd like to thank Vanessa Van and that's on the other side of the glass. The control board's doing a fine job as always. We're back tomorrow, 10 o'clock. See you then.